Gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Cawthorn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary, thank you very much for taking time to come to speak to our committee. Mr. Secretary, do you have input and influence on health policy within the Department of Education?
I'm sorry, say that again, please.
Yes, sir. I was asking, do you have input on the health policy within the Department of Education?
To the degree that we consult with the Department of Education on some of their proposals, we would have that input, but if it's not within our jurisdiction, then we do it on a consultative basis.
Understood. And as the Secretary of HHS, I'm curious to understand how this administration answers some of the following questions I have, as I believe they will directly impact crafting of education policy across the nation. Secretary, is it correct to say that the Secretary of Health and Human Services, your role is to protect the life and well-being of human citizens within the United States?
I am certainly responsible to make sure the health and well-being of the American public is taken care of.
Understood, sir. And can I ask you this? How do you define a human life?
How do I what?
Define a human life.
If you are out there making things happen, if you're surviving the tough challenges before us, if you're making it through and you have a loving family that's helping you out, all those things make it possible for Americans to move forward in a way that lets them prosper and become leaders for our country.
Right, yes, sir. But
Congressman, if I can ask you to speak up because it's hard to make out what you're saying.
Yes, sir. I'm curious, as you're the Secretary of Health and Human Services, we really care about when you start protecting the life of American citizens. Following conception in the womb, how long after that would HHS wait before they're taking action to protect that life?
Well, I will tell you that I'm not a physician. My wife is an OBGYN, and she could probably speak more directly to some of those more medical, technical issues. What I will tell you is that based on policy and how I can act as a Secretary of Health and Human Services, I'm guided by the law and what it tells us we can do when it comes to providing services to anyone at whatever stage you wish to consider.
Yes, sir. Well, I believe the lack of clarity in the answer of when a human life begins in America, I believe it has consequences. When you testified in front of the Energy and Commerce meeting, you previously stated there is no medical term such as partial birth abortion. There is not a definition of partial birth, but there is a definition of infanticide. Are you aware of the Live Action News article where they say that 5 viable babies, humans in America, were found dead and aborted here in Washington, D.C.?
Congressman, what I can tell you is that that term is a politician-created term. It is not a term that physicians use, not a term that my wife as an OBGYN uses to address the issues of pregnancy. But I understand where some of the folks who use that term are trying to go, but it is not a term that the professionals in medicine use.
Yes, sir. I understand that, but I mean, sir, Mr. Secretary, it was not 1, it was not 2, it was 5 human viable babies that were left dead in D.C. a few weeks ago. Quoting the article, a neonatal specialist called these babies premature people, humans within America. Secretary, your ambivalence about the definition of human life is instructive, and I believe in America it's dangerous.
Congressman, I'm not ambivalent.
Yes, sir. Well, this lack of clarity is immoral and a monument to the erasure of truth in our time. Mr. Secretary, you've pressed for federal funding to combat pro-life legislation and promote abortion through, and granted their euphemisms, but things like family planning against the will of the people and their elected representatives. And now we have 5 fetuses beyond the threshold of viability on the doorstep of Washington, D.C. And you can't tell us what a human life is. Those 5 children found in D.C. were just that. They were children. They were babies, humans, not medical waste. The callousness with which this administration views life and the sanctity of it is astonishing. A nation that cannot protect the most precious, innocent, and vulnerable among us has a moral compass that is not only stained, sir, but it's dead. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.